Afternoon, all. So today we have a uh, window onto the future, which is also a window onto a past, as Bob has put up there. Uh, Bob is going to share with us his thoughts on the whole situation with electric airplanes, which is emerging. Um, Bob's a longstanding resident of Santa Rosa, been involved out in the Pacific Air Coast Museum for 17 years.
Yeah. 15 or 16 years.
And I will encourage any of you who are interested, if you haven't been out to the museum, you may want to go. And if you have, you may want to join. Having said that for him, Bob, tell us about electric airplanes.
Okay, test, radio test. How do you hear me in the back? All right, welcome. So today we are not going to be talking about flying cars. There will be just a little bit of comment about that, but mostly we're going to be talking about flying taxis and flying commuter level short range airliners. But you can see the progression of magazine covers that have kept asking for flying cars. Hardware is hard, and I'm glad that the venture capitalists realize that. It's not a, quote, simple matter of software, unquote, what one of my colleagues used to say. He would get in trouble for that. Although there's a lot of software involved in this, hardware is hard. These are hardware projects. So why flying taxis now? Well, three elements have caught up to us here in the very recent past. Battery technology has improved in cost and energy density. Weight is an enemy of flying. Computer power is, we all know, has increased, but also the sensors that go along with making aircraft stable through software and sensors have shrunk in cost and raised in capability. Then the third element that Paul knows about, carbon fiber manufacturing. Carbon fiber is starting to show up in aircraft, and it's strong and light, although there's still some question about the strength that you'll see here. Here's a slide that shows advance in battery technology. We are between these two, present and advanced, and we are about 250 watt hours per kilogram. That is an energy density by weight, and watt hours is the power times the time. So that's a measure of the strength of the battery. And the kilogram divided by kilograms is the energy density by weight. There's another factor that we'll see later that is energy density by volume. So both of those are important, the weight and the volume that batteries take up. But here's the point of this slide. The next big thing is solid state batteries as opposed to liquid paste batteries that we have now. And I think we should charge the Oakmont Investment Club to research solid state batteries and see if we want to invest in that. But you have to realize that jet fuel is hard to beat in energy density. Here's a graph of the energy density by weight for jet fuel and batteries. And you can see the difference, 12,000 versus 600 or so, whatever that number is, 700. And if you analyze it by volume, the same thing goes, 9,000 versus 600. So jet fuel is hard to beat as far as energy density to make long and powerful flights happen. But yet still there are a number of projects for electric airplanes, especially of the two types we'll talk about today. For example, Scientific American has counted 170 electric airplane projects in 2022. The ICAO, International Aviation Regulation Board, it counts 300 projects with 200 startups, and the Vertical Flight Society, a society of people that are researching and producing these types of aircraft, counts 800 entrants. This map is a map of the launch cities of some of the vertical takeoff, let's call them electric helicopters, vertical takeoff and landing, or the short range commuter airliners. So all of these cities that you see are expected to be launch cities in the next few years. Some of this is blue sky, some of this is hype for investing and so on, but some of it is real. For example, the investments, these are real dollars. Whoop, these are real dollars here, and I'm not sure if that number, if I'm behind on that number. The point is, there's significant investments in R&D and making prototypes, and in the future there will be significant investments on building the infrastructure, not only to produce such aircraft, but to build new helicopter ports. This graph is actually a plot of the investments by company. We'll cover this Joby Aviation and this Archer Aviation and Hart Aviation. Where are they? Right down here. And you'll see what they're all about here shortly. So what does it mean to we seniors here in the next 2 to 8 years? Well, the first thing is that there will be an Uber car-like experience. In other words, a premium priced transportation from a heliport someplace in the city, bypassing traffic, going directly to a heliport at the airport, or similarly, a heliport in one part of the metro area going to another heliport in another part of the metro area. And although some of the numbers that some of the companies tout are like, it'll get down to regular Uber car experience, not Uber X experience, not black town car experience prices. But right now, it's likely to be premium prices as existing gas helicopters are. The second thing that'll be important to us a little further down the line is 30 passenger small commuter airlines, like the ones that used to land here, the Havilland Dash 8 and so on that used to land here. We've since outgrown that. Of course, they go further, but we used to have a, I don't know, 17 passenger, whatever it was, going from Santa Rosa to San Francisco years ago, Santa Rosa to LAX. And those are smaller airliners that didn't go that fast. They weren't that profitable because they couldn't have that many passengers. But here, what we're talking about is electric commuter-sized airline with 30 passengers, and that'll open up smaller airports, so you won't have to go to the big hubs, or bigger airports to smaller communities. I don't know where we're going to get the pilots. This technology is actually very new, or at least the present state of the technology is very new. And it has a Sonoma County connection, believe it or not, a very important Sonoma County connection. In 2011, the Experimental Aircraft Association out at the airport, these are the association of people that build their own airplanes and test their own airplanes and so on, they're home builds. They formed a committee to write a grant to get some money for the Green Flight Challenge. And it was, the grant was issued, they won the grant. It was issued by Google and NASA. And the principal out at the Aircraft Association, the Experimental Aircraft, was Dr. Brian Seeley, a local ophthalmologist who's for years been interested in building his own airplanes and testing high efficiency airplanes. But he and his colleagues wrote this grant to get this Green Flight Challenge test done at our airport in 2011. It was won by this aircraft here, which is basically, if you look at it real carefully, 2 gliders put together with a pod in the middle for the batteries and the motor. And what is a glider? But it has a long, thin wing because it wants to be glide, and it has very streamlined shape. And that airplane won it. It was made by Pipistrel Company in Slovenia, and they have since gone on to be bought, at least their electric division, by Textron, which is a parent company of Beechcraft and Cessna, General Aviation and Business Jets. Big deal. They don't produce anything that remotely looks like that. They produce, for example, first electric trainer airplane, little 2-seat electric trainer airplane. This airplane got the equivalent of 403 miles per gallon per person, zero emissions, with an extremely high lift to drag ratio wing, in other words, a glider wing. This airplane got the champion low noise. This number represents a low noise, very, very quiet. It was amazing. I was standing about right here, and you could hardly hear the airplane when it got to about equivalently right there. So even though this is high-tech airplanes monitored by computer-aided equipment and so on, it was still started by a human with a green flag. I thought that was very fun. So total amount given out to the winner was most of this $1.47 million prize. The second place got a little bit. And it was, at the time, it was the largest ever for electric aviation. Or it says aviation. I didn't produce this slide. The Green Flight Challenge people do. So I doubt if that's correct. 1.7 million, 47 million for aviation in general. It must be electric there. But here's the important part. The entrance to the challenge spent $7.6 million building their prototype and testing it. And even more, the intangible of 20 PhD graduates resulted from this Green Flight Challenge and the companies and universities that got it ready. So, I want to point out what NASA, this is a quote from NASA. It's not a quote from Google. It's not a quote from the Green Flight Challenge committee and so on. This is NASA. They labeled this effort a Lindbergh moment. Remember, Charles Lindbergh opened up flying nonstop from America to Europe. They also quoted, this event was the dawn of the age of electric flight here in Sonoma County. I thought that was fascinating. So why do we need electric airplanes? It's actually not for fuel economy. Electric airplanes or airliners, fuel airliners right now get okay mileage. Here's the car mileage. I don't know where that number came from. Maybe that's including electric cars, equivalent mileage, including plug-in hybrids, et cetera. Here's that winner. This slide was produced by a Green Flight Challenge. Here's that winner that we mentioned, and they had off the charts. But it's a false number, unuseful number, because the glider can't take a suitcase and so on. The real reason that we're doing this, or that the industry is doing this, is to start to reduce the carbon footprint of aviation travel. Travel by aviation is the most carbon intensive things that mankind can do by traveling. It's much more carbon, even divided by the number of passengers, it's much more carbon intensive than regular cars. Where's a regular car? Petrol car here. It's much more intensive, of course, than the trains or national rail trains and so on. That's the real reason. However, the long haul flights or the domestic flights are not the target here immediately, because that's too hard a problem for electric battery technology and so on to tackle at this time. The short haul flights that I mentioned, we'll call them commuter airline type lengths, are what the target is. I went the wrong way. All right, so what goes into the carbon cycle emissions in jet fuel aircraft versus electric short haul commuter aircraft? And this will be what's called the fuel cycle emissions. It is to make the fuel and use the fuel. Okay, fuel cycle. There's another cycle called, I forget, something like the total cycle, that involves the carbon load of building the car and junking it later and so on. So for a jet airliner, existing jet airliner in the short haul range, that's about 47 miles. This is the number that it takes to drill the wells, transport the oil to a refinery, refine it, and then transport it to the airport and fuel the plane. So this is make fuel, carbon load, fuel on board, ready to take off for gas aircraft. There's going to be another element of using the fuel here in a second. Here's the carbon load of battery, make fuel for batteries, if you will. There's two big elements. One is in the past to make to make and consume the movie. This is the past, this is the present. The reason that there's an element of consuming the batteries because the batteries are slowly used up. The chemicals and the anodes and so on are slowly used up, and that's why they have a finite amount of charge cycles that they can withstand. And so consume is a part of it. And of course, all this is amortized by revenue passenger kilometer. It's advertised by the amount of people and how far they fly. So it is apples to apples. But then look at this huge component, the red, of charging the batteries. And so sitting on the runway, ready to take off, the gas airplane wins, and that's because the fuel has such high density and so on. But now we're going to take off and use the fuel. So that completes the carbon cycle. And you can see that when you burn the fuel, the gasoline engine powered airplane goes way up here to this number, whereas there's no additional carbon load on the electric airplane because there's no emissions during flight. All the emissions are expended during making the fuel and charging the batteries. And so the yellow graph, the yellow line represents the savings amount of electric airplanes versus gas airplanes. And there's about a 2-to-1 savings shown here. That will improve the better situation you have with the charging. For example, this red charging carbon load that we said is the US average. The US has plenty of coal still. There's plenty of natural gas still. If you improve your carbon load of making electricity to what California has or Europe has, this is the European Union, in the blue, you get a additional savings and the electric airplanes start to look better. If you're totally renewable, the green bar, then of course that's the best. There's still a finite but small carbon load of green energy generation to charge the battery. So that's with basically the present day. I advanced this curve, I didn't make this curve. This curve is advanced to 2030 because at this kind of range, we're not quite there yet, as you'll see. But by 2050, where we have sleeker planes, better batteries, and more renewable power generation, everything will improve. Test, test, test. Okay, is this too loud or is it okay? All right. Okay. I think we're through with that slide. Even the gas airplanes will improve by 2050. In other words, they'll be sleeker, and the engines that power those will be cleaner and more efficient, so on by 2050. But the electric airplane still wins. So let's study the two types of airplane we're going to study today. One is type A, so-called type A, I call it that, electric commuter airlines, but the market size is small. Right now, the batteries can only support about a 47-mile range at best case. And so that's only 4% of the total flights, but only 0.03% of revenue passenger miles. So it's an extremely small market. And really, what we need is a bigger airplane that can go further. In the future, we'll have, for 2040 batteries, the next generation of batteries will have about 130 miles range. And now we're talking 9% of flights and 0.7% of revenue passenger miles. Here's an example of the leading contender for small commuter airlines made by Heart Aviation in Sweden. This is an all-electric 19-passenger regional airliner, they call it. I call it commuter airliner, aimed for verification for certification in 2026, and who knows when it'll be in service. But it's a moot point because the Hart Company has already determined that the range of this airliner is not marketable, and the size of the passengers, 19, is too small to be a market credible airliner. And by the way, look at this battery, 400 kilowatts hours that they dropped off the hours there. And that's a pretty big battery pack. So Hart Aviation is actually going to first come out with a bigger airliner, a 30-passenger airliner, and it has, however, a hybrid model, like your hybrid plug-in hybrid. It has electric batteries in this big pod underneath here, electric batteries to take off and the first part of the cruise, and then during cruise, a gasoline-powered turbo generator, a heavy-duty generator comes into play and generates current to not only charge those batteries, but to also power these electric motors. So this is literally the same kind of plug-in hybrid that you have with your Prius. Plugs in to charge the batteries at the airport, and that keeps the pollution away from the big cities and so on, the heavy population areas. So that's pretty much the state of the art of the commuter airliner type of plane. Here is the one that's in the news, the electric taxis. They're going to be more fun, and they're all over the news, as you'll see. This is a company called Joby Aviation, and they are one of the leaders in electric vertical takeoff and landing, eVTOL air taxis. They are headquartered in Santa Cruz with their R&D labs. Their prototype production was in Marina, down the way on Marina Bay. And then their production plant is going to be in Ohio. They've already got tax breaks from the state of Ohio and so on. So they're very far along. They've gone public and so on. They bought Uber Air that operates conventional helicopters in New York City, for example. They really didn't want anything to do with operating conventional helicopters. What they wanted is the Uber Air app, all the app to schedule and get paid for flights and cars. So this is a class of vertical takeoff. Notice right now the propellers are pointing straight up. However, when they're cruising, the situation shifts to a model that is somewhat like the winners of the Green Flight Challenge: long, thin wings for good lift and low drag. The propellers are now rotated to forward propulsion position, and that's a more efficient. It doesn't take as much power to cruise as it does to take off. It's very power intensive to take off vertically. These slides just show the propellers advancing through 90 degrees between takeoff and transition and then cruise. So let's take a look at some critical specs on this vertical takeoff helicopter, eVTOL. Like, they don't call it helicopter, they call it electric vertical takeoff and landing. So it has room for 4 passengers and 1 pilot, autonomous later. And the 1 pilot is very important. You'll see in a couple of slides here. And so they're allowing for the total aircraft plus all the major elements, 4,800 pounds, of which they're allowing 1,000 pounds for 4 people, a pilot, and luggage, only 1,000 pounds. There will be some flights where they can only take 3 people's luggage and a pilot. The batteries necessary to develop the power to lift off vertically are as much as 2,200 pounds. They're very secretive about the details here. Even though they've got a number of patents, they're very secretive about the particular details because the battery weight is a very important number. But what I want to point out is that that leaves 1,600 pounds for the airframe and the electronics, the computer, the sensors, the electronics, we'll call it. That's a pretty light aircraft. And there's some criticism that 1,600 pounds is minus the weight of the electronics is too light an airframe. The range is hoped for to be 150 miles, but they'll accept shorter range here immediately. 200 miles an hour, but they're maximum, but they'll actually not go that fast in practice. Here's the size of the battery on this, 200 kilowatt hours. And for comparison, that's about 2 to 3 times the batteries in the different Tesla models. Check me on this, George. And about 10 to 20 times a 20 or 10 kilowatt hour power wall, Tesla power wall that you have in your garage. So this is a pretty serious battery in a fairly light vehicle or aircraft, let's call it fairly light aircraft. Therefore, there's a lot of skepticism about if this is going to work. Although they've had a lot of flights that you'll see here later. This is one of the very positive things. The noise of this type of takeoff and cruise is 1/100th of a sheriff's helicopter, which are very noisy in takeoff, and they're reasonably noisy in cruise too. You've all heard them. Here's Joby in the news, and this is 2 minutes, 35 seconds. Oh.
New at 6 tonight, some Bay Area aviation startups have set their sights high for the future of air travel.
New companies are working to make electric air taxis take off. As KTV's Tom Vakar reports here, there was a conference on this very topic out at San Francisco International.
Preserved for all time on YouTube, it was 61 years ago that the Jetsons first introduced modern Americans to the flying car. SFO is hosting the International Air Taxi World Conference with the latest in electric-powered VTOLs, vertical takeoff and landing taxis soon to be seen above many cities.
For airports, it's really important for us to understand what are all the implications that go with this emerging technology, because we need to be ready because it's coming.
They could become flying airport buses. In 2025, no less than United Airlines will air taxi passengers from downtown Chicago to O'Hare Airport in just 10 minutes, and in other cities soon thereafter. A flight from SFO to Napa, even in the worst traffic, would be just 25 minutes, not almost 2 hours. The taxis are being supplied by Archer Aviation.
They're 100 times quieter than helicopters, they're far more affordable than helicopters, and they're fully redundant, which means they're far safer than helicopters.
The air taxis are so safe, so forgiving, and so automatic, they would not necessarily need to have a full pilot's training and license.
It's akin to flying a plane in a video game.
Companies such as Quantum 3D Simulators say operators can learn all the necessary skills on simulators with final check and qualifications on the air taxis themselves.
You do so much simulator in a day when as soon as you get into the flight, and immediately you're just like you're home. You feel like you know everything.
I tried their simulator, and after some very hard landings, finally got it to land safely with no harm to anyone.
As you can see, there's going to be a learning curve here. But as you can also see, this is something that you can do time and again, make lots of mistakes, and by the time you're really competent at it, you could actually fly the aircraft.
I think it's coming much faster than people think.
Jim Duthobny is talking about personal flying cars that the Aleph Flying Company said would cost somewhere under $40,000 in mass production.
This technology is more advanced and it's more safe than almost anything which is flying today.
On Thursday, the conference adjourns to Monterey Airport to see the real things in action. Tom Vakar, KTVU, Fox 2 News.
Hey, that's the only thing I have on flying cars. He said it's safer than anything out there, $40,000. Don't hold your breath on that one. I didn't research that. I don't believe it. That wasn't the subject of this talk, but you heard that guy say it. I think he's from Silicon Valley. And Joby is all over the news. They have gone public. There is criticism of whether or not their batteries will work. They have already negotiated on paper the tax advantage and so on to get their production plant in Ohio. Here's the Air Force buying 9 of these eVTOLs to test for $131 million. Here's Toyota investing $400 million in Joby Aviation. And the reason that that's important is not only the money, of course, but Toyota will bring them production expertise. Toyota's #1 manufacturer and very high reliability cars. Here's Delta Airlines investing $200 million in Joby Aviation, and they're going to do a home to airport offering for their frequent flyer and the premier class of frequent flyer members. Now, this doesn't mean that they plan or anybody's planning to land one of these eVTOLs in your backyard on your driveway. What they really mean is a black car, I'll call it a black car, town car, UberX car, a car that will wait for you and show up right at your door, will take you to the nearest heliport. That's what they mean by home to airport. And then the heliport to a heliport at the airport will be the fast travel in one of these aircraft. But you'll see some reality here. This is a model that, although this map was produced by CNBC, the concept and the numbers came from Joby Aviation. This is a model of the planned full build out of this marketplace in Los Angeles area. 42,000 trips a day among 28 airports, not only at major airports like LAX and some of the interior airports, but also major metropolitan hubs, if you will, Malibu, Long Beach Harbor, and so on. The interior airports are whatever, some of these, and the rest of them are important hubs, Staples Center, and so on. And but at 42,000 trips a day, there will have to be some coordination. Otherwise, these airplanes are going to be hitting each other all the time. And I didn't research that, but I refer you to a recent NOVA episode on Channel 9, and they just repeated it. It's from 2021, but they just repeated it the other day. It's called The Great Electric Airplane Race. Race means not time or distance. It means race to market. They talked about some research in controlling these types of aircraft, not via visual flight rules where they are not controlled. The pilots can go where they want, as long as they stay away from major airports, as long as they stay away from high altitudes where airliners go and so on. Not controlled by humans, air traffic controllers, but controlled by communication between eVTOL to eVTOL, and also communication from each VTOL to a ground computer, no human controller involved. And NASA Ames and Mountain View is studying that, but that will be a necessity for something like 42,000 trips a day. A few years ago, Uber Air division had a competition, or at least opened up a contest to accept architect companies' submissions for what these heliports might look like. And I don't know what this thing is, but it's kind of a living wall over a freeway. Fine. Here's a very practical one that shows a light rail arriving at a heliport, a parking lot for commuter cars, if you commute to wherever your home is to this heliport. Here's electric car charging stations. Here are the charging stations for the electric airplanes. And you can see this one taking off, and it has this propeller pointing straight up and so on. Here's a little light cargo van coming, and I think that's Amazon, but these things will not carry a whole lot of cargo, as we talked about earlier, at this time. But I want to tell you how new everything is. Even though I've told you all the effort and investment of Joby, and they have many, many flights, they were all remote controlled flights, not autonomous, remote control. In other words, a person was sitting at a console, that very console you saw, they call it a simulator, but he was sitting at that remote control console within radio contact distance of the eVTOL in question, out in the desert of Central California, or whatever, out in Central California. The first piloted flight of a human being in the Joby eVTOL was just last month. It's just hard to believe. And here's the excitement around that. It's hard to believe that it was, just last month.
Marina traffic, experimental 542 Bravo Juliet. Will be taking runway 29 shortly.
Notice it hovering. towards the last part of this report. Notice the young people involved.
Go if your checklists are complete and you're ready for flight. TCs go.
Controls 1 go.
EP1 go.
Batteries go.
Scribe 1 go.
Scribe 2 go.
Limits for flight confirmed. You are cleared for flight.
Copy, picking up. Airborne. 30 knots. Big G sail to stop. 45. Settling. Expected. Ground confirmed.
Notice this maneuver right here, 360-degree turn during hover. So this was just last month. And even though all this investment, even though all this hype, a human piloted that just for the first time last month. That maneuver I pointed out is a movement showing the stability afforded by the computer control of these aircraft, as opposed to a very experienced helicopter pilot that has to think and operate in 3 dimensions on controls that are wildly different than a regular airplane. That maneuver of taking off, hovering, and turning at a hover without turning on in a circle 360 degrees is kind of a mark of the stability and control of these types of things. It's equivalent to an ice skater having to do compulsory figures to show that they are totally under control, but in fact, the operation is useless. They never have to do that generally. And even the $100 million F-35 fighters, stealth fighters in the news, when they first happened in, well, it was in 1998, they also had to do that maneuver of takeoff, hover, and turn 360 degrees on their own axis. Again, this is a CNBC slide, but the numbers and concepts are from Joby, and they're touting the speed of these eVTOLs, 7 minutes from downtown lower Manhattan to JFK Airport, whereas a car, I think optimistically, is 45 minutes, highly dependent on traffic and so on. Here's the reality, though. Publications, newspapers, and bloggers like the Points guy, who does a very popular YouTube channel talking about all things about using airline points. Anyway, those publications love to run Race to JFK by different transportation means. It seems like one publication does it about every other year. This one happened a couple of years ago, and JFK was what's the best way to get there? Helicopter from lower Manhattan, Uber X or black car or town car, in other words, a car at your command that picks you up right at your door of your office, subway system, including a couple of changes, and an express train to JFK. Well, here's the result. The winner at 50 minutes, the lowest amount of time, was the black car. I put a number like this. They actually experienced a lower number of cost in the 2021 or whatever it was. I can't remember the year. And I put today's number on that. And it was considered low stress because the black car, the town car, picked them up right at the door of their office and took them right to the door of the terminal. And the only stress there would be if you ran through traffic and were late. But if normally it's a very low stress thing because the car is at your beck and command and it shows up when it's supposed to, et cetera, et cetera. It has unlimited, well, pretty much it's a bigger car and it has room for baggage. The helicopter was slower at 73 minutes, even though you saw a slide for 7 minutes for the actual flight of the aircraft. Well, the reality is that you have to wait for the town car to arrive, or not wait for it to arrive. It arrives when it said it will, because that's why it's so expensive. And it takes you from your office to the heliport. Then you have to watch a 2-minute training film, safety training film. Then you have to wait for the scheduled helicopter to happen, get on it, do your 7-minute fast flight. Then you have to, now you're at the heliport at JFK. Another black car is waiting to take you from the heliport at JFK the last mile, literally, to the terminal door in question. And so that one, I don't know why it was that slow, but it certainly was that slow, and that was the price a couple of years ago. Third, and not that much slower, was $7 for 2 subways, and then walk from the subway station to the terminal. And the modest stress is driven by having to change subways. If you've ever done that, you know that the levels and the different tracks and sometimes even different stations create a hassle or stress to make it happen. And the fourth one, at 90 minutes, was a modestly priced Long Island Express Railroad to get to JFK. However, you have to take another Long Island train, a local train, to the express train, and then its station meant that you had to walk to the terminal. So that is modest stress. And these people that you saw there are all native, well, I don't know about native, but they're all New York commuter savvy people. They're very savvy on trains and subways. Here's a key takeaway from these races, and it shows the can get confusing, changing trains, changing levels, changing stations. There are a lot of stairs involved, anxiety of whether or not your luggage will be too heavy to carry up this next flight of stairs and so on. The helicopter is not necessarily faster if the helipad isn't close to you, and that's the issue about getting to the helipad. This represents another eVTOL. This is the Archer Corporation. This VTOL company is headquartered in Santa Clara, Silicon Valley. They have a prototype production in Central California. And they're way behind, but they're planning to produce this in Georgia. One of the things I want to point out about this design is it has the long, slender wings for good crews like the Joby. It has the rotating propellers here pointed up, but during cruise, these back propellers actually are feathered. They fold down or something like that, so they're out of the airstream. They're not required for cruise. They're only required for takeoff. And the smooth curves of this aircraft means that it's produced by carbon fiber construction, and you'll see real details of the smooth curves of that one. So this is competition for Joby, and it's serious competition. This represents Joby in the news. Here's a $1 billion order from United Airlines for a number of these eVTOLs. However, this order was announced in place and so on the very day that Archer Aviation went public. So I think there's wishful thinking, marketing hype, and so on. And you can bet that there's fine print that lets United out of this big order if they care to or need to. But it's still a very good vote for Archer Aviation and this marketplace in general. Again, the Air Force is evaluating these Archer units. They are behind Joby. Here's yet another competitive idea with a Santa Rosa connection. The same group that did the Green Flight Challenge, after the Green Flight Challenge, formed a Sustainable Aviation Foundation that runs symposiums. Here's a 2018 symposium in San Francisco. Sometimes they have this symposium at AirVenture Air Show in Wisconsin. But anyway, their design is quite different. It has long, thin wings of a cruise like the other ones. However, it only has 2 electric motors that don't rotate. So the concept of this one is extremely short takeoff and landing. 250 feet roll. That's from here to the end of the tennis courts, period. That short roll, and they're taking off. And then I'll be the first to admit that this is a paper design. However, this group technically is very astute. It's not just a Santa Rosa group. They have a whole little crowd designing these and writing papers about the human factors, the business factors, and so on. Their concept of a pocket air park involves short takeoff and landings. For example, this aircraft right here is coming in for landing. By the time it gets to the end of the runway here, You'd think it would touch down here like a normal airplane, but no, it's still high enough in the air that it's quiet to the neighbors that might live just outside of the airport. So it's still high enough at this point that the neighbors can essentially not hear it. It actually does not touch down until the X. So they don't need the first 90 or 80 or whatever percent of the runway. Similarly on takeoff, the takeoff roll starts right here, but they don't take off down here. They take off at point Z. And again, they climb. And by this time at point 12, they're so high that they don't offend the neighbors and so on. And here's the multitude of aircraft coming and going. But the pocket airport is alleged to be fittable in 4 acres of approximately this dimension here. That's about the size of a baseball stadium in square footage. They can even get smaller if they allow for takeoffs, landings to be over water, where they can be a little noisier. And one runway that's simultaneous takeoff and landings, because this guy only uses the first third of the runway to take off, and then he climbs. This guy comes in underneath him, behind him, whatever it is, coordinated carefully to use the last third of the runway for landing. Okay, that's enough, but I would like to finish and decompress with this art video, so-called art video. And this is the Archer aircraft. Notice the LED lighting. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay. I still would like to keep the microphone. If you have a question, I'll bring the microphone to you.
These prototypes appear not to be able to really carry much of a load to make them financially solvent. You know, from my observation, is that correct?
Yes, you're referring to the 1,000 pounds for 4 people and 1 pilot and their luggage. Luggage is at least 50-pound limit. Let's say you go on an international trip and you have the big suitcase and so on. Yeah. That's because of the battery technology versus the size of the batteries, the size of the aircraft, and so on. Yeah, it's very iffy, isn't it?
It sounds to me like it's catering more to an individual wealthy person for their own private transportation.
They're not. None of the reports I read talked about landing at your home and taking off from your home. They were all heliports where you have the serious chargers, much more serious than you have at your home. But they just aren't talking about that yet. I haven't heard that. They did have an accident about a year and a half ago. It was under remote control at the time, so no personnel were harmed. But if something happened in the last couple of weeks, I haven't heard of it.
Okay, other questions?
What did you hear? What did you hear about them stopping testing? Okay, maybe in that crash that they had about a year ago or whatever.
Okay, if I were wearing my investment hat, would you recommend I invest in one of these companies?
In my career, I have found that you don't want to be the first in anything. You want to let the technology and the marketplace shake out some issues. On the other hand, that's my statement about Joby and Archer and so on. On the other hand, that solid state battery, I wouldn't invest in anything that's touted in a certain lab at a university. But if a manufacturing, especially a battery manufacturing company, starts talking about solid state batteries, then yes.
Okay. Other questions? Bob, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. 50 minutes, sorry. It was 32 minutes at home.
Here, if anybody is interested, next month we're going to start a 2-episode discussion of cutting the cord. If you are currently still a Comcast customer, we will be discussing whether that's a smart thing to do or not and how to evaluate that. We're going to do 2 months on that, one of which will be to give us all information about what's really going on. And the other one is to answer the questions that will come out of the first meeting, which will be 1 million questions. Okay, so cutting the cord.